Hello all and welcome to Movies with My Cat. I'm Nathan and that's my pal BigHead off camera. Thanks a bunch for clicking on our very first video. I know it might be apparent from what you're hearing and seeing that this is indeed our very first video, but you got to start somewhere, and we'll keep working on it. Of course, some of you probably clicked here because of the title of the video. You know what you're getting yourself into when it comes to Death Nurse. For you, our lesser quality might even be a welcome sight. If you already know and enjoy Death Nurse, then you likely understand that lesser quality doesn't really mean anything. Lesser quality can even make for an enjoyable thing, and I don't mean so bad it's good. Personally, I don't believe in something being so bad it's good. If it's good and you like it, then it's good and you like it. You should never have to apologize for your taste in art. Death Nurse never apologized, and its director, Nick Millard, certainly never apologized. And if he did, he had no reason to, because he managed to transcend the boundaries of cheap filmmaking and ended up creating uniquely singular art. Yeah, that's right, uniquely singular art. How else would you describe this scene from Nick Millard's 1987 movie, Criminally Insane 2?
Russell, put that goddamn knife down now! Put that knife down!
They really are. But when the table is part of the art, there's no wrong way to use it. Nick Millard is a nice example of taking what others might see as a shortcoming, leaning into it, and making great art happen. In Nick Millard's case, that shortcoming was ultimately money. I'm familiar with that. But lack of funds definitely wasn't the only deciding factor in the look and feel of Millard's films. In fact, his biggest and maybe his first influence was likely a guy named Steamship Sam. It does. Not a mob boss, though. Steamship Sam was a founding member of a group called the 40 Thieves, which does sound like an organized crime syndicate of some kind, but it's not. Although some of these guys did break a few laws, Steamship Sam himself spent some time in prison in the 1920s, including a stint at San Quentin. But regardless of who did and didn't break laws, every member of the 40 Thieves definitely broke the rules. That's what made him kind of cool. The 40 Thieves were a pioneering group of filmmakers and film distributors who played an early role in the formation of exploitation film. They deserve their own episode, but essentially they went around the country showing their smut-filled films in the style of a traveling sideshow. And they had to do it that way because in the spring of 1930, standards were basically changing in mainstream movie theaters across the U.S. due to something called the Hays Code. Now, we're not film historians. I'm just the guy that likes movies. But in short, if you haven't heard of the Hays Code served as a set of guidelines for what was basically okay and not okay to show in your film if you wanted that movie to play on a big screen. Now, the kind of movies Steamship Sam and the 40 Thieves were showing fell soundly outside of those guidelines. One example of Steamship Sam's more popular films is 1927's Is Your Daughter Safe? It was made up of pre-existing films about sex work and medical footage of venereal situations. I really don't know what I can and can't say here yet. Haven't figured that out, but yeah, I know. Sorry. I didn't come up with it. I didn't come up with the idea. And also, BigHead, I clean your litter box, so don't talk to me about decorum. I only mention this film because it's a good example of what Steamship Sam did. He took existing educational films and smashed them together with other stuff that he himself filmed. So why was Steamship Sam such an influence over Nick Millard? Well, Steamship Sam was, of course, Nick Millard's dad, and like his dad, Nick Millard also smashed up several films to make one, but the pre-existing films that Nick used, well, they were his own. If you've seen Death Nurse, you've also seen portions of Nick Millard's earlier film, Criminally Insane, because he includes shots of that movie as a dream sequence in this movie, in Death Nurse, the movie we're talking about today. Another one of Nick Millard's movies is edited in there too, but it's a much smaller portion, something called Panache that we've never seen. Are you talking about Nacho? Nacho Libre? Now, if for some reason you skipped the first Death Nurse and went right to its sequel, Death Nurse 2, then you've seen all those movies I just mentioned, plus portions of the first Death Nurse, of course. Again, he's just smashing them all together. This is a trend in most of Millard's films, and fully untangling them is something I'm not really interested in doing. Instead, let's just say, the good news is, if you like Death Nurse, you'll probably like a lot of Nick Millard's movies on account of you're seeing parts of all of them as recycled footage in all of his other movies. Millard also recycled music in credits too. This is the sound of 3 musicians from the Oakland Symphony noodling around with their instruments. Yeah, I like it too. It's creepy. That's the same intro music and credits that play over the opening for both Death Nurse and Death Nurse 2. And when I say same credits, I don't just mean the same design or template. I mean the same exact credits with the same actors credited regardless of whether or not they were in the movie. Yeah. And maybe you're thinking, well, it's the same credits for Death Nurse 1 and Death Nurse 2. Maybe it works, it's a sequel. It doesn't. In fact, it's the reason behind a bit of a mystery, which we'll get into in a few here. But those opening credits actually belong to and were first used in a completely different Nick Millard movie, 1973's excellent Criminally Insane. And then again, they were used in its sequel, Criminally Insane 2. They were also used in another one of his films called Dr. Bloodbath. I'm willing to bet they're probably used in some of his other films I didn't see. In addition to recycling footage and music and credits and actors, you could easily argue that he recycled quite a few of his own plots. Oh. Okay, you're going to sit there, but just slightly off camera? All right. By the way, you may have seen on the title card that Death Nurse was directed by Nick Phillips. That's Nick Millard. He had a bunch of pseudonyms and AKAs, some more fun than others. Working in the San Francisco area, Nick Millard started off in the early 60s making the kind of movies your grandpa hid in his sock drawer. The pseudonym he used while making that kind of film was usually uncredited. By the early 70s and 80s, he shifted into horror and action. I've mostly seen the horror stuff, but I did manage to catch one film he made under the uncredited banner. And I really can't say much about it here, I assume. Right, but there's one scene I'd like to discuss where they had a cat, and the little cat is gently wobbling as a couple goes to town. Yeah, that's risky stuff. Later in the movie, there's a woman who goes to town on herself with a shoe. I guess Nick Millard likes shoes. Yeah, and cats, maybe cats too. But I think what Nick liked most of all was saving money. That, more than any other thing in my opinion, is what ended up shaping the look and feel of his movies. As proof, we can point to several things. There's the aforementioned recycled footage, the recycled music, and then there's the fact that he'd often cast relatives and amateur actors, and even himself for certain parts. That'll save money, Should I get who's big in the 70s? Okay, Burt Reynolds, sure. So, okay, Burt Reynolds. Okay, should I get Burt Reynolds for the small part, or nah, I'll just cast my mom. Get in there, Ma, we got a movie to make. And he did. He did cast his mom in his movies, which is a nice thing to do. She brought you into this world. The least you can do is put her in one of your weird movies. Even if that means putting her in lingerie and having her show a little side action.
Mr. Davis? Mr. Davis?
Yeah, that's his mom. Frances Millard, bless her heart. It also wasn't uncommon for him to just use his own house as a setting of a film. You know, that's what he did here with Death Nurse. But the bit of information that most makes me believe that what drove Nick Millard was the satisfaction of saving a dime came in the form of a quick throwaway mention of a common household item in the commentary track to his film Criminally Insane. Now, in a scene in that movie, we see a woman dragging a body out to the trunk of her car in a large laundry bag. Keep in mind now that Criminally Insane was made in 1973, and the commentary was recorded in 2005. When the laundry bag hits the screen, Nick remarks that he still has that laundry bag. Incredible, right? That's a span of 30 plus years. Now, who holds on to a laundry bag for 30 plus years? I'll tell you who. People who want to stretch a penny as far as they possibly can. And Nick Millard, he's just the man to hang on to a laundry bag for 30 plus years. If I was looking to be succinct, right after I said hello in the intro, I would have said, today we're going to be looking at a movie made by a guy that used the same laundry bag for 30 years. And I think with just that bit of information, you'd have a decent feel for what Death Nurse looks and feels like. So what exactly is that look and feel? Well, gritty is one word that comes to mind. I know what you said, let's just keep it moving. So gritty, that's one way to put it. Nihilistic is another. Disconnected from humanity altogether is also a good phrase to describe a Nick Millard film, but my favorite way, our favorite way to describe a Nick Millard movie is the word confounding. Confounding, like the phrase of lesser quality, can sometimes be used to describe something in a positive light. Confounding is the characteristic I'd use to describe many of our favorite films, and it's a fair guess that it would also describe 80% of the movies we plan to cover on this channel. Now, Nick Millard makes confounding films, and Death Nurse will leave you confounded. 1987's Death Nurse, directed by Nick Millard, tells the story of a murderous medical duo. That duo is Dr. Gordon Mortley and Nurse Edith Mortley. They're not married, they're siblings.
You're my brother, Gordon, and I'll put up with a lot for your sake, but you tell her to keep her hands off my sherry bottle.
Also, though they both kill with equal veracity, Nurse Mortley gets top billing as the Death Nurse, and Dr. Mortley's relegated to more of an accomplice kind of a position, I guess. That's why it's called Death Nurse and not Death Doctor. Also, around the time that Death Nurse came out, Nick Millard put out another film called Dr. Bloodbath, so it'd be silly to release a movie called Dr. Bloodbath and Death Doctor in the same year, especially if the guy that played the doctor in both movies was the same guy. And it was Albert Eskenazi. Albert Eskenazi is both the titular Dr. Bloodbath and Dr. Mortley in Death Nurse. Albert Eskenazi was a lot of things in several Nick Millard films. I'd describe his acting style as sedate. Millard describes his acting as deadpan. I think either works.
What about my surgical fee?
I billed Medicare for $27.50.
You what? $27.50? That surgery is performed every day for no less than $4,000.
Gordon, we have to be careful. We mustn't be greedy.
It isn't right. It was a difficult surgery. You know how he struggled.
He was just a friend of Nick's, and that's how he made it into his movies. Nurse Edith Mortley, played by Priscilla Alden, on the other hand, was a professional actress. She was a San Francisco-based actress who did local theater and other non-Nick Millard movies. She's the same actress that we see dragging that infamous laundry bag. She's great, and she shows up in several of Nick Millard's films, and often, for me, at least, so for us, she's what makes those films so enjoyable. I love her turn as Ethel in Criminally Insane. It's pretty intense. Nick loved her too, so much so that the two worked with each other for the next 30 plus years, right up until a bit before Pamela Alden's death in 2006. I guess if Nick Millard likes you, he kept you around, be you a laundry bag or a talented actor. So together, Nurse Edith Mortley and Dr. Gordon Mortley run the Shady Palms Clinic. They help folks with a number of things: tuberculosis, heart transplants, alcoholism, you name it. You need help, they'll take you in and deal with you. The problem is, neither one of these medical professionals is qualified to run a health clinic. Nurse Mortley isn't really even an accredited nurse. She did start nursing school, but she never finished on account of being kicked out. The movie doesn't say why she got kicked out, but I'm going to say she partied too hard. Yeah, I guess that's a possibility too. As for Nurse Mortley's brother, Dr. Mortley, he is a doctor. An animal doctor. He's a vet. Yeah, so I guess for you, a cat, he's just a doctor. Maybe he was great as a vet. Maybe he was great with animals. He wasn't very good with humans. I mean, right off the bat, he isn't, because we're shown a scene of Dr. Mortley performing what he refers to as a difficult surgery. But the difficult surgery is really just him putting various steak knives into the patient's belly, and the scene plays out like a trip to the world's worst Benihana.
Scalpel. He's gone, Nurse Mortley. Please notify the appropriate agencies. It was a very difficult surgery.
Now, each patient's condition is tended to in a similarly reckless fashion. The tuberculosis guy, he eats a pillow. That guy's name, by the way, John Davis, so no more Garfield. Yeah, that's right. Now, the guy with the bad heart, they tried to help. I want to say they tried to help that guy. But the doctor, he had butterfingers and dropped the heart, and the cat made off with it.
Now quickly, the second heart. Get away, cat.
Get away from there, you damn cat! Come on! Oh,
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty.
come on,
Here,
kitty!
Kitty.
Kitty!
Here,
Come on,
kitty.
kitty! Oh,
Here, kitty, kitty.
Kitty, come here!
Here, kitty.
Come on, give me that! Give me
Here,
that!
kitty. Kitty.
So the surgery, it didn't work out, but it's probably for the best, because that was a dog heart that the doctor was trying to cram into that fella's chest. I don't know a lot of stuff, right? But I'm certain that the heart of a 10-pound Dachshund is a poor replacement for a 200-pound man. That dog, too, by the way, was actually Nick Millard's actual dog, so he wasn't above casting his own pet either. Now, when the doctor isn't being grossly negligent with his surgery patients, he's busy being wholly inappropriate with his patient seeking help for her alcoholism.
You've got to stay out of Edith's sherry, all right?
I don't really like sherry.
I don't know. I'm sorry, buddy. That poor woman was Louise, and I don't think she's going to want to drink any less after that encounter with Dr. Mortley. I imagine that scene was probably uncomfortable to shoot for a lot of reasons, but mostly because Louise was played by Irmgard Millard, Nick Millard's wife. Although, seeing as how Irmgard, or Ermi, as Nick called her, was also Nick's business partner, so maybe it wasn't comfortable at all. Maybe it was just business, let's get the shot, keep it trucking, So the nurse and the doc having to constantly dispose of bodies and lying about their missing patients, it's a lot of work, as you can imagine. But things get worse when Faith Chandler, a worker from the county social services, decides, you know what? Shady Palms is taking such good care of the patients that I've been sending them. I think I'm going to check in myself, get a little rest. Faith Chandler is played by Frances Millard, the aforementioned side boob showing mother of Nick Millard. I don't know what convinces Faith Chandler that Shady Palms Clinic is doing such good work. The only proof that's been shown to her is seeing a client that she sent there wave at her from its bed. But that's, I guess, good enough to know that she wants to stay there at Shady Palms. But what Faith Chandler didn't know was that the client that she was looking at was long kaput, then buried, and dug up, and placed on a bed, and made to wave Weekend at Bernie's style.
Hello, Mr. Davis. You're looking much better today, Mr. Davis.
You know, I say Weekend at Bernie's style, but Death Nurse came out nearly 2 years before Weekend at Bernie's. So maybe we need to start saying Death Nurse style when we see someone working a dead person's limb like that. Yeah, me neither. I won't give the ending of Death Nurse away, but you'll never see it coming. Not in the sense that it's incredibly original or anything like that, more in the sense that it's abrupt. Don't get me wrong, you're going to see many things in Nick Millard's films that one would describe as incredibly original. You know, that's a big part of why we enjoy Nick Millard's films. You're going to see things you just won't see in any other movie. But again, in Death Nurse's case, the end is surprising mostly because it's so abrupt. But when you regularly make movies that are only an hour long, sometimes even a few minutes short of an hour long, you're bound to run out of time and you just got to end your movie, I guess. The good thing about watching a 60-minute movie is that it leaves you enough time in the day to sit through another 60-minute movie. Or in the case of Death Nurse 2, a 56-minute long movie. Now, if you do plan to watch both films, I do recommend watching them back to back, mostly because, to Nick Millard's credit, he picks right back up where the last one left off. And it's great because you don't got to sit through a whole bunch of setups and exposition. You know, you just get thrown right back into the mix of things. Death Nurse 2 was released the following year after Death Nurse 1. It was released in 1988. And with Death Nurse 2, Nurse Edith Mortley and Dr. Gordon Mortley are still up to their old tricks, chopping them up, feeding them to the rats.
Get away from me, rats.
And, you know, if I wanted to be flippant, I'd say that the storyline for Part 2 is pretty much the same as Part 1. But you could say that same thing about a lot of sequels. Precisely. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's true enough, BigHead. Terminator and T2 are both about a cyborg looking for a person, more or less. And like T2, I'm sure DN2, that's Death Nurse 2, is preferred, you know, over the first one by some. I'm sure of it. That said, Part 1 and Part 2 of Death Nurse, they're pretty similar. Nick Millard's mom shows up again, this time as a twin sister to the character she played in Part 1, which was the snooping county social service rep with the side boob.
What is this? Some kind of joke?
Joke? I'm Charity Chandler, and I'd like to have a word with you about my sister, Faith Chandler.
Part 2's plot also involves another county social service rep that's also snooping around, only this time it's not played by Mother Millard, right? It's played by, well, we really don't know. The character's name is John Sawyer, but the actor's name, we don't really know. It's this gentleman. Well, that's just it, buddy. Remember that Nick Millard reused the credits of Criminally Insane for Death Nurse 2, you know, for those credits. So we won't find that actor's name in the credits either. And neither Nick nor Ernie Millard could remember the actor's full name. They only remember him as Michael. So for now, at least, his name's lost to time. And it's too bad because he's pretty good. In addition to John Sawyer, other new characters in Part 2 include Brownie, a tough-as-nails homeless woman who doesn't take nothing from no one.
Hello, Brownie. Hi. You don't remember me? I'm gonna you.
If Brownie looks familiar, it's because she's played by Ernie Millard, who played the alcoholic patient in the first Death Nurse. Another new and fun character in Part 2 is Mr. Rudinsky, a Polish immigrant whose last words before eating a hatchet are,
Capitalism is good,
On the commentary, Nick Millard said that this fellow was played by a real-life published poet, published by real publishing companies, and not a self-published poet. Nick was careful to point that out. Me neither. But it seemed important to Nick. Nick was also pretty taken with the actor's Polish accent, making sure to say several times emphatically that it was indeed a real, true Polish accent. You know, when it came to filmmaking, the things that seemed to be important to Nick Millard were... No, not dumb. Not dumb. Let's say unconventional. When you couple that with Nick's bottom line of getting the most bang for his buck, and his special brand of rapid-fire, off-kilter editing that sometimes it's impossible to tell if you're watching a flashback or a mistake that he just kind of left in, what you get is a confounding yet magical bowl of cinematic goulash. Yeah, goulash. Because just like goulash, despite being delicious, the Death Nurse films and Nick Millard's films in general aren't for everyone. Some people say they don't make sense, and I can't argue with that. Sometimes logical storytelling is difficult to achieve when your entire movie is shot over 3 measly days, like both Death Nurses were. And at that point, you just got to use what you got, even when it's not enough to make a cohesive story. Other people complain that Millard's films are boring. Well, buddy, if you're bored, that's on you, my friend, because sometimes you got to go looking for the fun. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us. Check out Death Nurse. If you haven't already, better yet, watch it with a friend. You want to add anything before we go, Big Head? Of course, support your local cat. Bye, all.